Hi everyone, this is Andrew Prima, Ukrainian American, reporting from Kiev. In today's podcast, week 192 of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and this is the second week of November 2025. In today's podcast, we will talk about Pokrovsk and the latest updates from this most intense part of the front lines. So, as you know, Putin keeps on pushing his forces to take Pokrovsk, and unfortunately, he's slowly achieving his goals. So Pokrovsk, which is currently is a strategically important city for Ukraine, can be lost soon. In the past week, Russian troops broke through the last line of defense and moved closer to the city. Some of the Russian diversionary reconnaissance groups have already entered the city. President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that the situation in Pokrovsk remains very difficult, but that any decision on a possible troop withdrawal is the prerogative of military commanders on the ground. According to the President of Ukraine, Russia seeks victory in Pokrovsk to convince US President Donald Trump that Ukraine should withdraw its troops from the entire Donbas region in order to end the war. Nevertheless, Zelensky stressed that the Ukrainian armed forces cannot abandon Ukraine's east because people will not understand. So many people died for defending Ukraine, and to give away land, it doesn't make any sense. And the main thing is that nobody will guarantee you that if Russians size this or that town, they won't move further. There is no deterrent factor, the president emphasized. Zelensky added that the Russians don't have that much strength and is attacking Ukraine's energy infrastructure in an attempt to force the country into submission before spring. They know that as soon as the energy factor disappears, they don't have any other strong factors, the president of Ukraine said. In the second week of November, thick fog has enabled Russian troops to move further into the key strategic city of Pokrovsk. Ukraine's 7th Airborne Assault Corps says weather conditions, particularly dense fog, have prompted Moscow to intensify its bid to get increasing numbers into the ruined city to encircle Ukrainian forces. Russian forces have spent more than a year trying to seize the city. Ukraine military says there there may now be 300 to 500 Russians there, and President Volodymyr Zelensky says the situation remains extremely complicated. On November 11th, Russian military convoys were observed advancing into Pokrovsk under the cover of fog, utilizing the weather conditions for tactical advantage. So the Ukrainian armed forces reported that withdrawal from five villages located north of Hulyai-Pole in Zaporizhia region, citing a deteriorating and increasingly unstable defensive situation in the region. These recent Russian advances mark the most current phase in an ongoing offensive that began last winter, during which Russian forces gained control over the expansive open plains in the southern region of the remaining Ukrainian administered areas of Donetsk region. In 2025, Russia's largest territorial gains near the junction of Donetsk, Zaporizhia, and Dnipropetrovsk have received little media coverage. Since the very first month of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, the front line around Hulyai-Pole, which had a pre-war population of 12,000 people, has been one of the most stable sectors of the entire front, despite concerted efforts by Russian forces to storm the city early on. The settlement lies less than 10 kilometers north of the contact line, but with Russia's recent advances, Hulyai-Pole could soon face another front opening from the north. In a rare official admission on November 11, Ukrainian military spokesperson Vladislav Voloshin said that Ukraine forces had withdrawn from positions around five settlements in the area, including a complete withdrawal from the villages of Uspenivka and Novomykolaivka. In a positional war, usually defined by the capture of a single tree line or 1 kilometer at a time, this marks an undeniably different tempo of advance altogether. Meanwhile, further north across the border of Dnipropetrovsk region, Russian forces are continuing to make inroads toward the city of Pokrovsk, not to be confused with Pokrovsk in Donetsk Oblast. Over the autumn, Russian troops have closed the distance to less than 15 kilometers from Pokrovsk, bringing what used to be and still is a key logistical hub for Ukraine's defense in the area into the range of first-person view in a range of FPV drones. Russia's defensive push in this area began in earnest after the capture of Velika Novosilka in southern Donetsk region, a city that at one point served as the launching pad for one of the main efforts of Ukraine's counteroffensive. After crossing the Mokry Yali River, Russian forces steadily advanced westward, and by mid August, for the first time in the full scale war, began taking territory inside Dnipropetrovsk region. The westward advance also continued into the northeastern corner of Zaporizhia region, from where the current approach toward Pole is now being made. Unlike the raging battles around a place like Pokrovsk, the settlement Konstantinovka or Kupiansk, where Ukraine has deployed some of its top brigades and drone units, and where the situation, though difficult, remains under control. As Ukrainian military spokesperson often like to say, the defense of these wild fields further south is in an almost perpetual state of semi chaos. Poor coordination between units and the frequent need to pull back from combat positions have prevented Ukrainian forces from stabilizing their lines of defense. The chaotic nature of the fighting here is evident in the numbers. According to the figures published by the highly trusted Ukrainian mapping and analytical organization Deep State, over the month of October, 69% of all Russian territorial gains were made in the area around Pole and in eastern Zaporizhia and Dnipropetrovsk regions. Despite the area hosting only 16% of Russia's total assault operations, according to the General Staff figures. This means that while Russia is not allocating as many resources to fighting in this area compared with the larger cities of Donbass, it is still gaining a disproportionate amount of territory thanks to the weakness of the Ukrainian defense. These developments are a harsh reminder for Ukraine of the consequences of an overstretched military and the extreme challenge of defending such a long front line while facing a serious manpower crisis and holding back an enemy with a seemingly endless supply of new recruits. In the current state, with little to no strategic reserves, the Ukrainian military simply cannot defend everywhere at once, and very difficult compromises must be made on a regular basis. For years, the biggest and most important fight has been in Donbass, and as Russia escalates efforts to take the rest of Donetsk region by storm, Kiev responds in turn by concentrating resources on the region's defense at the cost of other sectors. Here, it is the understandable that Ukraine deprioritized the defense of the wild field. The area is sparsely populated and lacks large cities, and the loss of territory there doesn't immediately carry major strategic consequences. For a long time, Russia's slow advance in the area was tolerable. Meanwhile, for Moscow, attacking here was not initially a priority either, but seeing an opportunity to gain territory and increase pressure over the midterm, they took it. Now, with Russian forces approaching Pole and Pokrovsk, the chickens have some home to roost, and the consequences of the Russian success in this area are becoming too serious to ignore. By approaching settlement Hulaypole from the north, Russia is beginning to put itself in a position where in 2026 it could outflank Ukraine's entire defensive line in Zaporizhia region, a front that has been consistently one of the strongest and most stable during the full-scale invasion. That, in turn, could eventually lead to a serious push on the city of Zaporizhia itself, which, according to the results of Russia's sham referendum in the occupied territories in 2022 and the constitutional changes that followed Moscow, treats as Russian territory. Of course, capturing Zaporizhia would be a monumental and probably impossible task for the Russian army at this stage of the war. But even simply bringing the regional capital into the range of FPV's drones could be devastating for Ukraine. Meanwhile, to the north of Dnipropetrovsk region, the president and the general staff will soon have to start reporting on developments in the Pokrovsk sector, particularly embarrassing given the timing of the imminent fall of the much more well-known city of Pokrovsk. Whether or not this part of the front line can be stabilized over winter remains to be seen, and much of it depends on Kyiv decision making, specifically whether more forces will be deployed from elsewhere, including the top drone units currently holding back Russia's advances in Donbass. Again, no easy solutions, only more trade offs. So for now, the defense of Hulaypole and Pokrovsk is led by just a handful of weaker mechanized and territorial defense brigades, backed by a few smaller separate drone units. Also, present present are elements of Ukraine's controversial newly formed assault forces, personnel led by Valentin Manko, a close associate of Commander in Chief Alexander Syrsky, who was mired in scandal in late October for posting photos showing confidential Ukrainian tactical maps, visible and unblurred. Just a few weeks ago, Manko was boasting of the assault forces' successes in clearing the villages of Uspenivka from Russian forces. But now, as the military itself has admitted, Uspenivka is occupied by the Russians. Ever since spring 2024, when Russian forces pushed beyond the city of Avdiivka and began gaining momentum in Donetsk region, Ukraine's defense of the front line has depended on a delicate balance, a very thin line between states of control and chaos. With Ukraine's manpower crisis deepening over time and Russian forces continuing to attack relentlessly through 2024, in 2025, the front line has largely been held in the state of control, thanks mainly to the heroic efforts of Ukrainian soldiers on the ground and the vast expansion of Ukraine's drone capabilities. Spots of chaos have existed, usually in isolated locations and for limited periods. But the part of the front line around the meeting point of these three regions has arguably been the largest area of consistent chaos over the past year, and this is reflected in Russia's success in advancing. So, going 2026, this new chapter of the centuries long and bloody history of Ukraine's wild field could become more consequential for the nation's future than any other. The rather free use of the adjective strategic when we talk about Pokrovsk. So, some media outlets in relation to the city agglomeration is a little alarming because it may come out of nowhere if we eventually have to retreat during fighting. We need to prepare for different scenarios in any sense. After all, what makes a particular settlement strategic is not its location for the lines of communication nearby. Control over a specific settlement becomes strategic when After capturing it, freedom opens up for large scale actions behind the enemy lines to undermine the entire defense system. And for this, in fact, freedom and the ability to move quickly forward are essential, which is difficult to guarantee in conditions where reconnaissance and destruction means are present in real time on both sides. And additionally, the Russian Federation currently relies on its tactics not on mechanized forces but on dispersed infantry on foot, as well as on the presence of an echelon to develop a breakthrough. At the moment, in terms of manpower, Russia's advantage is relative, not absolute, and the enemy certainly doesn't have a fresh group of 100 to 200,000 that could act further. All of the above doesn't mean that that is happening now in the Pokrovsk Mirnograd agglomeration is not a crisis situation that reveals several systematic problems in the defense forces of Ukraine. It is also doesn't mean that losing the agglomeration will not have consequences for our defense system. But the widespread use of adjective strategic unintentionally plays into the effort of the Russian Federation, which will try to turn its local battlefield success into strategic wins through the media, fueling narrative about the futility of aiding Ukraine and the lack of alternative of its own achievements. The widespread use of the word strategic also complicates the dilemmas faced by the country's top military and political leaders as they fight for a strategic settlement until the end. Although our strategy has long involved exchanging territories to inflict maximum Russian losses, while trying to safeguard our forces so we can repeat the same tactics in new positions if it continues to work. So, as we make a conclusion, most likely, according to the current situation and latest reports, Pokrovsk city will be lost very soon. Russian troops has the goal and the order from Putin to take over Pokrovsk city by December 15th. And according to the latest developments, it might be possible. Thank you for listening. If you like my podcast, share with your friends.